conversation. My clock reads 2:09 p.m. on Friday, October 31st here in Puerto Rico. My name is Sam Tolman, and I am the co-founder of the Puerto Rico Energy Forum. And I am joined today by Francisco Paco Rodríguez Castro, who's the president and CEO of Berlín Capital since its creation. Paco has over 25 years of experience in finance and government in global companies, and is a key advisor to companies across a variety of sectors. So Francisco, welcome, and thanks for being with us.
Thank you, Sam, for the invite. Happy to be here.
So I reached out to you in part because you wrote an article, an opinion piece at the beginning of October about the pension mess that Puerto Rico's in, and we're going to focus on that for a large segment of our conversation today. But maybe can you give us a rundown on what is the state of the pension nightmare that we're currently in, and feel free to be broad or focus on PREPA, however you'd like to answer that.
Well, let me begin by saying that this came up on my end because my assistant prints the various electricity bills that I pay every month, and I always ask her to point out any changes, right? Whether higher consumption or higher fees or anything that wasn't there before. So when I was reviewing these 5 bills, I noticed she had highlighted a specific line. So looking at it, I said, within the what they called clauses of reconciliation items in the electricity bill, an item that says pension payments adjusted for pensions, right? So in my case, for my house was about $80. That adjustment for my business was about $600, $625, and for other properties, the vicinity of $250. So out of the blue, I'm in the hole, right? For about $1,000.
And were you personally responsible for that pension debt?
No one is. No one is. Now I'm paying 2 pensions. I'm paying my own, right? And I'm paying somebody else's, right? Which I had no bearing in. And the issue is, Sam, that this is the greatest lack of transparency I've seen in Puerto Rico. It's a hidden tax. It's an abusive tax for several reasons. But what concerns me is that, can you imagine what the electricity bill must be for the large businesses in Puerto Rico, the large manufacturing concerns, all kinds of malls, construction? I mean, it must be insane, right? So I'm really concerned because I was so concerned that I wrote an article on it, actually 2 articles. The second one hasn't published, but I think it's crazy that this happened the way it happened. It should have been discussed with the island.
So this represents this 2.9 cents represents a pretty significant bump in what actually is represented on people's bills, right? And so at 7 or 8%, and that's on top of already nationally high rates and nationally low reliability. How do we quantify the actual impact that this, and not specifically the pension raise on the bill, but the broader high cost of electricity? What's the R factor that the explanatory value that the energy sector has on Puerto Rico's competitiveness.
So if
Excuse me, 1.9 cents based on the pension surcharge.
exactly, so we were paying about 25 cents. Now we're paying 27 cents or sort of, right? But what is crazy, Sam, is that that if you look at your electricity bill and you look at the actual electricity cost without the adjustments, it represents about 18% of the total bill. The rest is just it's adjustments and other things. So it doesn't, it seems really a very complex, weird system, right? Because those of us that have had benefit of living in the States know that over there is very different, right? You don't see any of that. But what is more concerning is that PREPA from 1980 on to when the pension fund was exhausted. In 1980, PREPA had 105% funding of this retirement system. But at some point in the 90s, they changed their pension fund to allow people to retire at age 50 with 20 years of service. And then the last 3 salaries of 3 years was the pension qualification number. So let's say, for example, Sam, that you work there for 16 years as an accountant. Suddenly, you became assistant executive director with a salary of 10 grand. You were getting paid in your old job 5 grand. So your 10 grand salary in 3 years wasn't qualifying for your pension. So you achieved 100% increase in pension or more according to the system. The other issue with this situation is that the board of the PREPA retirement system was composed of all insiders. So they decided whatever they wanted to do, right? So the combination of higher benefits, not paying the funding adequately by PREPA, and ignoring the damage, because if you I did a graph, and we saw that graph in my article, how it was coming down year after year. I mean, this was a fixable thing, Usually pension funds, you control the damage by increasing contributions, limiting benefits, increasing retirement age. I mean, this improving investments. So there were many ways of fixing this situation, right? And also there are fantastic benchmarking. Aon produces an incredible report on the pension benefits for all the utilities. So I mean, you had all kinds of guidance, right, to make sure this would survive. Because I mean, it pains me that about 12,000 people rely on this pension, but it pains me more that the citizens and business of Puerto Rico are now paying for something that we had no bearing on.
Yeah, I mean, it was, and that chart you're referencing shows that it was fully funded in the 80s, down to about 50% in the early 2000s, and then completely insolvent by 2020-ish, 2023-ish. And so, we just wrote an article through the Puerto Rico Energy Forum about Sunnova's bankruptcy, and we quoted The Sun Also Rises, where there's a conversation is, how do you go bankrupt? It's like, well, there's 2 ways to go bankrupt: gradually and then all at once. and this is one of those perfect examples where the writing was on the wall for decades, right? And unfortunately, this is in many ways a fitting analog for so many other challenges that Puerto Rico faces that have nothing to do with energy, right? You have an increasing amount of recipients of support, a decreasing amount of people paying into the system, and every single one of those defectors, whether it's people who leave the grid or people who leave the island or people who decide that they're going to leave the workforce because of age or disability or a variety of other reasons, all that represents on a macro level is a shift in cost to the people who can't leave the system, won't leave the system, have no interest in leaving the system, but at the end of the day have a higher burden to pay for the folks that do. And that's part of the other challenge, right? Is that when PREPA's operations were privatized, the burden was shifted to, went from several tens of thousands of recipients with not enough, but at least a more balanced amount of contributors to the system to now, the number that PREPA has on their official books. I think you cited 250 something. So right there, you just have an inverted pyramid that is deeply imbalanced.
It's important to mention that PREPA, in the 80s and 90s, was receiving incredible amounts of money because of the 936. So they were flush with cash, right? The issue is that in Puerto Rico, no one adjusted once that law was repealed. We had an adjustment. Puerto Rico had an adjusting period of 10 years, right? From 96 to 2006. And no one adjusted downwards. And it happened across the government, right? Ultimately creating, 15 years of depression in Puerto Rico, of recession, I should say. So we see that, right? Because the government bankrupt, the central government retirement system, teachers, judges, and PREPA. So the bigger question here that we need to ask ourselves is that, have we learned anything from the bankruptcy and PROMESA? And
well, I think it's stunning, that in the years since the bankruptcy in 2016 and the creation of the Fiscal Oversight and Management Board, the government's pension burden has gone up. And in trying to study the examples of where restructuring of municipal debt, one of the first things that is taken into consideration is how do you the Gordian knot, right? Is how do you emerge from bankruptcy without disproportionately negatively impacting the cost of living in that jurisdiction? And one of the things that governments across the board have done is pension reform, which creates immediate liquidity, reduces payment burden, and disincentivizes. And this is an important thing that I think is alluded to in your article, but maybe not mentioned directly. It disincentivizes government bloat, right? Pension is one of these incentives that helps drive people into jobs that might not otherwise be so glamorous. It's a benefit on top of a whole variety of other things. We don't want necessarily more government employees. We don't need additional incentives for a sector that at the end of the day needs to be downsized for as part of the broader economic reforms and civil service reform that the island needs to go through.
Well, and moreover, right, as I was analyzing all the different scenarios, right, I took it upon myself to look at Detroit bankruptcy, Greece, the Argentina issues, and other jurisdictions, and noting that in all of them, all the pensions were reduced, right? In Puerto Rico, for some reason, and I suspect that the per capita is so low that they haven't touched the pensions. However, the PREPA pensions are 3 times the average pension of the central government. No, central government pensions are $1,400, and PREPA's average is closer to $4,100.
What do we attribute that to? Is that political strength of UTIER and the fact that PREPA, is such a legacy element of Puerto Rican society? How do we attribute the disproportionality?
Because
and stickiness.
PREPA's salaries were similar in size and nature to those of other utilities in the U.S. That was the benchmarking they use. So that explains why the salaries are 3 times of the central government's, right? Moreover, the union, as you mentioned, had always the strategy of negotiating the decrease in election years. So that created an incentives for the politicians to agree to anything and to make them go away. So they had held hostage Puerto Rico for 50 years, right? You hear, and I haven't forgotten that. Somehow UTIER thinks that they can still run PREPA, which
and they seem to be the ones that are most eagerly waiting in the wings in the event that Luma either fails or is forced out, right? To say, we told you so, and we're ready to take back over control. Now, I think many of that, much of that is a pipe dream and would require seemingly interminable legal battles and very expensive litigation against the government. But nevertheless, they seem to have the idea that, we can still wave the UTIER flag and be ready for when they call us up to the plate. So let me ask, how do we get out of this in a broader sense? There's 1 in 4 employed individuals in Puerto Rico work for a government agency. It's one of the largest proportions in the government in the United States. It also means that that's a really important electorate for politicians. And simultaneously, we haven't had a 2-term governor since Rosselló Padre in the 90s. And so do we need a reelected politician who can make some of these unpopular decisions? Or is there another pathway that we downsize government, reduce pension without fear of, political reprisal?
Let me answer that in 2 forms. First of all, we became a territory that celebrated initiatives instead of results. So politicians would announce anything, it will be celebrated, but no one will follow through with whether the results were actually achieved, right? So then the populism took over, right? And they have all been making populist decisions, right? So and no one has taken it upon themselves to look hard at the numbers and data and start changing the realities of Puerto Rico to create wealth instead of distributing poverty. So, but that takes guts, vision, knowledge, and determination for any politician to think like that, because most what they love to have is to cut ribbons, right? And do groundbreaking ceremonies, right? So, but to fixing back of the house situations, it takes another kind of leader to do that, and I'm afraid we haven't found that.
Is the FOMB positioned to be that driver of institutional cultural change? And to give you an example, municipalities are looking and are in a dire economic situation right now across the island. They are looking to unlock state level funds for projects in their municipalities, and the FOMB has asked them to tie these projects to economic development, for instance. And it turns out, from what I hear, that that's a very hard thing for a lot of these local leaders to define. And so the FOMB seems perfectly positioned to say economic development isn't municipalities spending money. It's creating the pathway for other people, for private industry, for investors to spend money and create jobs, not for municipal government to grow, but municipal government to breathe life into the economy for it to grow. And so, I see these positions in the FOMB as well as in El Negociado, the Energy Bureau, as unelected, which gives them the benefit, and people already hate them to some extent in different pockets of society, which gives them sort of the perfect excuse. It's like, well, you're gonna hate me if I try to do everything right, whether you think it's wrong or not. So might as well do unpopular things because they need to happen. We need this type of civil service reform. We need this type of institutional cultural reform. We need to say things that you're gonna hate, but use us as a scapegoat so that it's not anybody else's fault. It's our fault, and you're not going to like us no matter what. Is that thesis? Does that have legs? Does that make sense, or does there need to be somebody else in the driver's seat to implement some of this change?
Well, let me respond to that this way. If you look at PROMESA and the law, right? There's supposed to be a revitalization coordinator, right? Which is, in this case, my friend Jose Perez Riera. He's in the board. The board itself is in charge of not just debt refinancing, but creating the basis for a sustainable, achievable, and workable financial benchmarking, growth, and improvement. And in my view, they haven't achieved that completely. Second, we have 78 municipalities, and they all claim different things about every issue. However, the thing they do agree on is that they need the inventory tax, which is highly recessive. And as you know, the governor vetoed that yesterday. And that is something that, that needs to be worked on. But the bigger issue, Sam, is that under PROMESA, municipalities are not directly involved, but I think we're going to have to involve them and just re-engineer the whole focus of municipalities to harness what is essential services, what they need to do, what they can't do, probably implement shared services things, and rein in the white elephants. If you take a trip throughout the 78 municipalities of Puerto Rico, you're going to find big elephant projects that were never finished. Probably the closest one to us is the Naranjito.
That's the one that came to mind.
Yeah, Coliseum. When I worked at the government, I was president of the Economic Development Bank. The Economic Development Bank had the job of validating viability of any projects for the municipalities, right? I remember this is while I was there. They brought me that project, right? And we looked at it, and we told them, "Listen, Mayor, you can't build this here. It doesn't make sense because all they have is the team for volleyball, the Naranjito Changos. So you don't need a 20,000 people Coliseum for that, right?" So we declined the request, but a couple of years later, whoever followed me approved it. So there it sits, $7 million or $8 million unfinished for the past 15 years, right? And if you look through Puerto Rico, you're going to see big examples of that in one way or another, because the municipalities move in waves, right? Suddenly there's Coliseum fever, then hotel fever, then this, I mean, so we need to rein in that, and we need to narrow their focus and narrow their shape, because they need to learn that money doesn't need to be overexpended, that budgets need to be balanced, that having surplus is good, that having a narrower oscillation is better. So I think the board and actually the governor and the whole government apparatus has to involve themselves with this. Otherwise, we haven't learned a thing from the bankruptcy. And and we keep on paying the errors of the past, right? And if you make an error one time, it's okay, you made a mistake. You make an error 2 times, it could be a mistake. But you make it 3 times, that's a decision. So you're deciding, right, to make things wrong. And what's going to happen if we do ever get out of the board and we begin with the fiscal imprudence that Puerto Rico had for many years? We're going to go bankrupt again.
So this leads me down a variety of different paths, and we'll see if we hit on as many as we can. What's the PREPA's restructuring is now entering litigation. We're in year 9. Is it a salvageable process, or do we need to accept that large-scale public utilities, as we know them, are obsolete? And maybe there's a different way of approaching that question, Paco, is, what's the likelihood of us seeing in Puerto Rico a decentralization of currently unitary departments at the central government, whether it's education, refuse pickup, police, hospital? I mean, there's a lot of things that are bottlenecked through the central government. What's the likelihood we see regionalization, an elevation of municipal voices into something that is a little bit more reasonable, not necessarily at the municipal level, but as a consortium of like-minded communities that are neighboring to achieve certain scale? How do we get out of this seemingly intractable challenge?
Well, for you to change, there has to be a willingness to do so. And to achieve change, you have to eliminate bad habits and things that get you into trouble, right? If you want to lose weight, there's no way in hell you're going to lose weight if you eat more. Yeah. So there has to be a political willingness to do it right, to change and improve and make sure that all the processes are efficient, improved, that the central government provides the service in an efficient, cost-effective manner wherever it serves. And regionalization or municipalization, whichever you want to call it, could be a way. However, it hasn't been the norm in Puerto Rico so far. So, and if there was a chance to change our behavior, was the bankruptcy. And sadly, we haven't transformed the island government apparatus as efficiently and as nimble as I would have preferred. Then to your point about the litigation in PREPA, okay? As you know, the government was able to cut about 50% of the bonded debt from $72 to $34 billion. But the argument from the bondholders in PREPA is that since these are revenue bonds, they are entitled to the revenues, right? So they shouldn't get a haircut, okay? So they had, as you know, several of the bondholders had reached an agreement. And bear in mind, most of these bondholders are opportunistic investors. They came in post bankruptcy, most of them, when the bonds were trading at nothing, right? So you're gonna make billions of those in profits probably. However, as I've seen in any bankruptcy, all the people that are owed money have to share the pain. And in this case, it's bondholders, pensions, and in our case, the citizens. So there has to be a shared pain for the outcome to be adequate, equitable, balanced, just. What you want to have is an outcome that has all these parties pissed off. Because if everyone pissed off, you have balance. Okay. So in the ideal perfect world, Judge Swain would determine that everybody needs to come to the table and cut something. Okay. So my guess is that these pensions are going to be cut because they're so high in comparison to that of the central governments, and the supervision of the pension system was made by PREPA itself. So they can't say that the central government was involved or there was a regulator or something. So it's just like any company, right? So that's my guess that's going to happen. I mean, I don't advocate for anybody to lose their hard-earned pensions, but in this case, I don't think it's fair for 3.1 million Puerto Rican citizens to pay for something they most of them don't have. I mean, can you imagine? I was explaining this to the guard in my office. He asked me specifically, and in his case was like $10. For my security guard in my office, $10 is a lot of money.
Right.
For him, is 10 medallas. That's what he told me. $10 is 10 medallas.
Well, and taxes and inflation, I guess, is a perfect example of this. But if you see your electrical bill go up, then it doesn't necessarily matter if it's a tax or a charge. It's inflationary. It's the most modest income earners and fixed wage earners on the island that are going to be most disproportionately impacted by this. 10% of your disposable income is a lot for something that is ultimately low quality and a debt that you had nothing to do with its incurrence.
Exactly.
So my question is then, how elastic? Well, before I get to the question about elasticity, I lost my train of thought. I'll ask the question about elasticity. How elastic do you anticipate energy prices are? We've already seen a massive defection, both from the island and from the grid, moving to, the industrial and sector in particular, but also residential families with the means and interest in putting solar panel. All of that means lower collections for the grid. If prices go up, should we expect far more defections, or just a poorer society that can't defect?
Well, there are so many ways of getting rid of the grid nowadays, that just about anybody that can take a loan, a $20,000 loan, can make it happen, and in some houses are less. So getting off grid with solar or renewables, for that matter, is an opportunity that could happen, increased. Also, I don't think that it hasn't increased as much because of cost and uncertainty of the reliability of the system. The solar panel system itself. So, but I think as the technology progresses, we will see an enhanced adoption of this technology into more houses and businesses.
That scares me, because obviously utility collections then go down, right? And so it is perfectly reasonable for all intents and purposes for people to pursue self-interest, right? That's sort of the basis of rational thinking in in so many other disciplines. But it has a tragedy of the commons type outcome, where we have utility collections incapable today. They're incapable of covering the costs, and that trend is only going to make it harder.
Oh yeah, and also salvation is an individual endeavor. So as people see these prices go out of whack, right, they're going to make an analysis and say, well, if I put down $5,000 on my own money and finance 15, I'll have my own house without paying to PREPA. So they'll do that. Okay. However, what we need to achieve is to have generation providers that can make the cost more effective for PREPA, or in this case, Genera, right? So, AES and Ecoelectrica, they supply very cheap energy to PREPA, or to Genera in this case. So we need more of that. How many of those we need? Whatever it takes. We
3,000 megawatts worth,
yeah,
likely. Yeah.
Yeah. We need to adopt an increased model that is diversified island-wide, with microgrids that supply by sectors with enough juice to be reliable. And we need to do it fast. The problem is that, and I look back, 30 years, is that every time oil prices went up, PREPA began some form of endeavor to reduce pricing and look at better ways to do things. And then prices will go down, and they will have done nothing. So that happened for 30 years, right? So we need to make a public policy determination. Okay, we're going to get rid of what we have, and we're going to make island-wide generation that is, 5,000 megawatts, right? Because we need to adjust for the future also, right? So we need to do that broadly, efficiently, with size and economically. And that will happen. We have the best example, Ecoelectrica and AES, right? Whether we like it or not, they provide very cheap energy for PREPA, and that's the reason we don't pay 40 cents per kilowatt.
You also see that it was the first legislative priority of this government was to amend the law that said that they have to phase out by 2027, because quite frankly, we aren't prepared for no alternative reality. We'll see what ultimately comes out of that, but AES is now in a potential position to name their price because the island can't afford to not have them. I want to talk briefly about the pensions again. You make in your article, and we'll link to it in the show notes here. I want to quote, you say Puerto Rican citizens now have both the legal standing and moral authority to challenge the pension surcharge embedded in PREPA's rates. Should we anticipate a class action against the government or against the Energy Bureau for this this additional payment?
Well, when I was writing and evaluating this article, Sam, I wanted to cover all aspects, and I'm not a lawyer, but I truly understand what standing means, right? And what actions can be taken. So I'm just planting the seed that I believe that the citizens of Puerto Rico have the standing and have the opportunity to challenge this pension adjustment cost. Whether that happens or not, but I truly believe that they have the standing and that can be achieved, and we can do it in time to have it be a piece of discussion at the Judge Swain hearings.
You mentioned in an article back in May that, and I commend everything that you write to people who watch and listen to this conversation, about a nostalgia for the quote unquote better times. And my wife and I have talked a lot about this recently. So it's reassuring in some ways to know we're not the only ones that are seeing this, even with the surge of pavas that we see around as a result of Bad Bunny concerts and popularity. It's like I look at with fondness to old photos from the 30s, 40s, 50s of Jibaros, and they have complete hats that we were used to be capable of producing a completely finished hat.
And they have all they have machetes.
And button downs working in the fields, right? Like there was a real sense of pride in this, and so this nostalgia, and you cite directly sort of the lack of a coherent, actionable national plan. Does that translate into kind of a general social pessimism? Is Puerto Rico a pessimistic place because it's always looking at what used to be better, or am I misreading that?
Let me put it. Let me answer that in two manners. Okay, first with nostalgia. Okay, until 1974, all citizens of Puerto Rico had a huge incentive to work. You know why? If you didn't work, you didn't get fed. So what happened in 74 on? Food stamps. The PAN, the payment, the nutritional assistance program, NAP, okay? And if you look at charts of labor participation, efficiency, and total labor, you see a complete decrease once the food stamps became, because what is a safety net in the US, in Puerto Rico, it became like almost like a salary for some. Okay.
Well, the numbers today are astounding. 45% of Puerto Ricans depend on this assistance program.
No, more. 38%. 38% of the island. So it's 1.2 million divided 3.1. It's 38.7% of all Puerto Ricans useful steps.
Astonishing.
That's astonishing. So then the other part is that I continue to advocate that Puerto Rico needs a plan, a national plan with supranational goals that everybody understands, protects, preserves, and pushes for Puerto Rico to reach. Until we have such a transformational plan, we will have no clear direction for the government or the citizens to follow. Because then we are at the mercy of the good intentions of politicians, which sometimes they have no knowledge of how to manage business or management. And the government of Puerto Rico is a pretty big management system, right? I use the example, when I became president of the Economic Development Bank, I was chief lending officer of Oriental Financial Group, a pretty big bank. And it took me about 6 months to fully understand the dynamic within the government. So and that's just my part of the business, right? So imagine for a governor how daunting it must be to understand and follow through with 143 agencies with insane complexities, right? So
and archaic ways of management at every level.
Exactly, and bureaucracy and wastefulness, etc. So what leads me to believe that if we do have a plan that is approved by both, private sector, legislature, the governor makes it into law, we have a set of goals that anybody understands and follows, then as a nation, whomever is in the government can pass to follow those set of laws and rules, right? And push for that transformation. We need to achieve that transformation. We need to achieve changes. We need to contribute more, and we need to create wealth and not continue to zero poverty. And another point I want to make, the Institute of Economic Freedom, chaired by my friend Rodríguez, has produced several fantastic documents. And I, on my own, we validated some of the arguments, especially the 60 or 50 laws that can change to create greater economic freedom. Well, we did an econometric analysis, Sam, of those laws. And those laws, if you amend them, in 5 years, we create $35 billion in new economic activity. That's a game changer for Puerto Rico. However, we need public policy in agreement that says, okay, we're going to achieve economic freedom for all in Puerto Rico. This is the way we're going to do it. And these are going to be the results. We're going to measure this, and we have to achieve 35 billion in new activity in 5 years. Those are goals, man. We need to follow those goals and push hard to achieve them.
So on that point, one of the areas where I think we lack goals that is of most concern for me as an economic developer is what happens, what is the strategy post federal funds? And this is something that for really since Maria, the strategy has been deploy federal dollars to rebuild infrastructure. Now, I think that in the wake of a devastating natural event like Irma and Maria, that's a worthwhile short-term strategy, right? You have to rebuild and you don't have the capital to do it. You're emerging from your own bankruptcy, and the federal government has stepped in to the tune of $80 billion or more to rebuild. We've used a small fraction of what's been made available. And so those dollars are finite. We have a federal administration who's more than interested in either clawing back or adding conditionality to federal dollars. And so we are way overdue in terms of trying to figure out, okay, how do we not just build the infrastructure, but build capacity and build the fundamental pillars of competitiveness across workforce, across real estate, across infrastructure, of course, energy for sure, just the regulatory regime that means cost in money and in time for businesses or investors. Where's the post-federal dollar strategy for the island? And in your mind, what does that look like?
Well, we originally ran our own numbers trying to analyze precisely that. And my analysis for the years 2024 to 2030 for GNP growth is as follows. 0.70% growth for this year, 2025. And for 2026, negative 0.80. 2027, negative 105. 2028, negative 170. 2029, negative 2.0. And we do have a forecast for 2030 of positive 0.50. We need to forget about the federal funds. We have to use our fiscal autonomy and change all the laws that create complexity and bureaucracy and eliminate all the obstacles for growth to create wealth. And in my analysis, we have done that, and it creates at least, Sam, 35 billion in 5 years. And once we totally understand how powerful this is, we can forget about federal funds so that they become the cherry on top, but not the meat, right? We need to do that. We need to change our attitude, our way of thinking, our approach, and fix the things that we can do on our own. And if the funds come, great. If not, we create our own sustainable economic model of growth, of development, of results, of investment, for everything, right? But we need to do that. We need to do that, and I mean, because I don't like, I mean, every time I see an announcement, in the first sentence, thanks to federal funds, we did this. I don't want to see that. That's not the way I want to feel proud about my island, right? We have to make sure we do things on our own. And the only way to do things on our own is to create a system that embraces economic freedom, that allows the market to work efficiently, that creates wealth, that every Puerto Rican has a chance for a turn at bat, to grow, to prosper. I mean, look at China. China has 11,000 trade schools. 11,000 that create technicians, machinists, plumbers, AC, etc. Can you imagine if we used to have that, the vocational schools here. We've sort of forgot them. So we need to bring that back, because not all kids can be doctors or sociologists or engineers. Some, and actually a lot, can. I mean, I have friends that are AC guys that make a ton of money, or plumbers, or, I mean, we need that. So we need to look at our landscape and convert all that we have available into workable improvements and schematic and systemic changes to enhance our economy.
There are across many of the widely accepted economic growth models, there tend to be two key drivers of output. One is technology development and technology growth, and the other is population growth. And Puerto Rico's in, though I think the numbers I'm seeing are the demographic challenges have stabilized, but technology development is not improving to outpace lack of population growth. And to quote a conversation that we had earlier this year with fellow economic developer and a former colleague of mine at Invest Puerto Rico, John Bosek, who I think put it really succinctly, there's no such thing as a low energy, high income economy. And the fact that Puerto Rico has not developed new generation in the last 25 years speaks to why we're seeing such a decline in both population and technology development. Now, there have been a couple of big name announcements. Eli Lilly earlier this week announced $1.2 billion of investment into the island over the next several years. We hope that we can continue to see that type of faith and confidence from the private sector into what the island can be, right? We're competing with a lot of other regional entities, both states in the US, as well as other countries that are interested in bringing business back to this hemisphere. But at the end of the day, if we're going to arrest the slide of out-migration and technology, a lack of technology development, we need energy that is boring for people and businesses. And quite frankly, we're not there. The way you've laid out the pension crisis is, I think, just sort of the tip of the spear, but speaks to a broader set of challenges of, sticking to an old model because it used to work and failing to adopt. One other anecdote is, I'll lament about how there are certain rural roads that have no formal name and have, there's no addresses beyond a kilometer marker. That if you went out walking, you'd never see a single kilometer marker on some of these roads. And I get told, just like, well, that's a system we inherited from Spain. I lived in Spain. Spain has moved on from that system. So there's nothing wrong with having inherited it. There is something wrong with having never evolved beyond it. And that's where we go from nostalgia to let's build a better mousetrap, because what we've got obviously does not work.
One of the biggest things here is that most people don't read, and they say things anecdotally. So as a banker, I have to be doubtful of many things. So I check everything, and before I speak, I try to at least have some sense of knowledge of what I'm saying, right? Not everything, but some, right?
What a radical approach.
It's very, very radical nowadays, right? Plus, I always have a bumper sticker in my office that says, "Don't believe everything I speak," right? I think that's what it said. Let me see. Yeah. No, don't believe everything you think. Okay. So, we have to be, we have to analyze things and educate ourselves on the challenges, on the opportunities, on what are our core competencies, where do we lack knowledge, where do we lack expertise, and our greatest strength here is that the Puerto Rican is very labor intensive. They come to the office happy and they work happy, most of them. So we have to take advantage of that. Look, even things like this, we receive, in terms of funding for healthcare, 69% less than all the states. Puerto Rico receives $4,000 per capita. The states receive 13,000. So we get shortchanged $29 billion every year in healthcare. So can you imagine the type of healthcare facilities we could have if we had 29 billion more funding in healthcare? That's something to think about. Also, we have water all over the place here, right? Either salt or fresh water. And there's not a single water salinization project in the island, or fisheries, or commercial fisheries fleet, or many other things that an island is supposed to have. So if you look hard, you're going to see thousands of opportunities, Sam. You just have to come together and make a list of goals, of proposals, and continue pushing on until we reach them all. And if you add that with adopting a full economic freedom status, we're going to create so much wealth in Puerto Rico that anybody has to move here.
So I want to end on a high note here. Berlín Capital's reported returns in stock and bank indices are very strong, and so in a world where investors are looking for predictability and stability, and Puerto Rico often offers neither, you guys have found a way to generate wealth and pick winners. What gives you confidence in the market that you see that ultimately leads to the success of your firm?
Well, first of all, we have the experience to fully understand markets. I was formerly, before I became a firm, I was managing director for UBS International. So we ran a pretty big book. And then we have a pragmatic approach to both investing, advising, and selecting. And as you know, we have our own indices. We have the Berlín Capital Puerto Rico Stock Index and the Berlín Capital US Bank Index. One has the 4 public companies in Puerto Rico, and the other have the 6 major banks. And as you know, both are having double-digit returns this year. So it's a matter of choosing what you know, right? But I'm a firm believer in diversified portfolios and educating and permitting my clients to fully understand what their investments are, because hell, if something goes wrong, it's their life, right? So our approach to that, it's a team effort, collaborative, fully analytical, completely math and scientific based. But what we provide most is consulting and advice to our client, because we like to become always a trusted advisors for whichever area of our business we do. But moreover, we look for relationships that are long lasting. That's our approach, and our greatest effort is to do that.
Again, Paco Rodríguez Castro, CEO of Berlín Capital Advisors, and I recommend everybody checking out what he writes in a variety of different publications, and visiting berlincapital.com to see and learn more about their work. Paco, thank you so much. It was great to talk to you, and really appreciate you being a part of the Puerto Rico Energy Forum.
Thank you, Sam. It's a pleasure, and please come in for wherever you need help with.
I look forward to it. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.